Okay, so the first thing that we have to do is we have to take the I out. So I'm going to take the I out. Now, 324, I would check to see if it's a perfect square. So if you'll plug in your calculator 324 square root, you will find that 324 is a perfect square. And that perfect square is 18. And remember that the 18 comes first. It's coefficient and then variable, okay? So again, the first thing we have to do is take out the i's. So I'm going to have I square root of 6 times I square root of 12 times I square root of 5. Then we multiply like part by like part. So I have then I times I times I is I cubed. The square root of 6, square root of 12, and square root of 5. So 6 times 5 is 30, times 12 is the square root of 360. So I'm going to rewrite I cubed as I squared times I because I know what I squared is. And I'm going to rewrite my radical as my biggest square of 36 times 10. I know that's my biggest square because 10 is not a perfect square, nor does it contain a perfect square. So my I squared becomes negative 1 times I times the square root of 36 is 6, and the 10 is still under the radical. So I'm going to multiply like part and like part. That gives me negative 6. My I comes next, and then my radical. Okay, so we have I to the 28th. So remember, we write these all as a base of 2. So then it's a question of, does 2 go evenly into 28? So you can do 28 divided by 2, and you'll find that it goes evenly to a power of 14. So then my I squared becomes negative 1 to the 14th. And remember, we talked about a negative to an even will be a positive, a negative to an odd will be a negative. That means that a negative to an even 14 will be a positive 1. Now you can stay tuned to the end of the video, or you can skip to the end of the video if you want more examples of these. I'll do a few more of these examples at the very, very end of the video. So this is order of operations. We have to do exponents before we do multiplication. So I'm going to raise both of these things to the 5th. So 2 to the 5th is 32, and I to the 5th is obviously I to the 5th times I squared. And the square root of 6 squared, or the square root of 6 quantity squared, is just 6 because those are opposite operations. Now guys, we've been doing this the whole time. So when we say x squared is equal to 16, we take the square root of both sides. So we take the square root because that square root undoes the square, and that left me with just x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 16. So we have been doing this same concept. Okay, so back over here. So I'm going to multiply like part by like part. So 32 times 6 is 192. And then I to the 5th and I squared is I to the 7th. So it gives me 192. I'm going to rewrite it as I squared. So 2 goes into 7 3 times with 1 left over. So I have 192 negative 1 cubed times I. So I have 192, negative 1 cubed is negative 1. That gives me negative 192 I. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 71. That gives me 2x squared is equal to negative 234. I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So I have x squared is equal to negative 117. So I'm going to square root both sides. And I get x is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 117. So 117 is not a perfect square. So I'm going to go ahead and take my I out, and I'm going to try and find that perfect square in 117. The largest one is 9. Now I know it's the largest one because 13 is not a perfect square, nor does it contain a perfect square. So I have x is equal to plus or minus 3, because the square root of 9 is 3, I square root of 13. Okay? A couple things I want to point out. Make sure your plus or minus comes first, your coefficient, your variable, and then your radical. Okay? So a couple examples to go back. So we have I, let's say, to the 55th. Okay? So remember, we always write that as a base of 2. So we do I squared. So how many times will 2 go into 55? Be 27. And that gives me 54. So I need one more. So I'm going to multiply by I. So we're going to replace I squared with negative 1 to the 27th times I. So negative 1 to an odd power will be negative 1 times I, which would give me negative I. Okay, we could do I to the 242. We have I squared. So that's even, so it's divisible by 2, so that would be 121. So we're going to replace I squared with negative 1 to the 121. And 121 is odd, so that would be negative 1. Okay, we could do I to the 36. So that would be I squared. And that would be, so 36 divided by 2 is an even 18, so I don't need the extra I. So I have negative 1 to the 18th. And that's even, so that would be positive 1. Okay, one more. We'll do I to the 41st. So that'd give me I squared. So 2 goes into, it doesn't go into 41 evenly, but it'd go in there 20 times. That gives me 40, and then times I will give me my 41. So then negative 1 to the 20th times I. So negative 1 to the 20th is 20 is an even, so that'll be a positive 1 times I, which will just be I.